Hello, my dear friends. As many of you know, I studied in the Mir Yeshiva in Yerushalayim in 1970. I talk about my experience in the Mir many times, and especially I discuss things that I heard or experienced from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in the Mir. Rav Chaim had a very profound impact on me. That year was a very critical year in my development, but in particular, I had such a tremendous chus to study under Rav Chaim. First, because he was as a Talmid Chacham, he was a Torah giant, but perhaps more significantly for me was the fact that Rav Chaim, as a religious personality, was a towering individual. He was unbelievable. He was a unique person, and there was so much that I gained and learned from Rav Chaim. In particular, Rav Chaim would deliver once a week. He would deliver a sichas musar, a musar shmuz, a musar discourse, and those sichos affected me so much. Rav Chaim was not a pie in the sky type of person, and he didn't say, fancy, complicated stuff. Everything was very down to earth. And Rav Chaim opened his heart when he delivered those Sichos Musar. We got a glimpse at who Rav Chaim was, because he was, when he was explaining how Esther confronted Achashverosh, and how Moshe Rabbeinu dealt with Klai. So all the different stories in Tanakh that he would interpret, it was from the prism of his own experiences. At least that's how I felt. I mean, I'm certain that that's the case, because he had lived through many difficult times in his life, and they molded who he was. And then when he studied Tanakh and or Chazal stories in the Gemara, he was studying it from the prism of his own personality, his own neshama, his own experiences. And I'd like to give you one, I think, to me, very powerful example that relates to this week's parsha. The Chumash tells us that when the brothers kidnapped Yosef, and at first they intended to execute him, which is unbelievable. Then they decided, okay, let's not do that. We'll sell him to the Ishmaelim. So the Chumash relates that there was a caravan that was passing by, and in the caravan there were various spices. So Rashi asks, what do I care whether there were spices in the caravan? Why is that relevant? So trivial and insignificant. So Rashi says, normally the caravans would carry tar and other materials with putrid odors, but this time the caravan was carrying spices, so that Yosef would not be affected by the smell of the materials in the caravan. Everybody asks, is that important that the caravan had spices? The event itself of being sold and taken away by the Ishmaelim was so unbelievably traumatic. Yosef kidnapped, he was a 17-year-old boy, kidnapped suddenly from his father's home by his own brothers and sold to Mitzrayim with no logical possibility of escape for the rest of his life. So what is that a compensation that he's sitting inside like the prison, the wagon that was like a prison for him, and it smelled nice? Why does that make any difference? So Rav Chaim said, very beautifully, Rav Chaim said that HaKadosh Baruch Hu here was orchestrated that there should be a reach tov, there should be pleasant smell, shalol kedarach, that was contrary to what normally would be the case. Lahoros, I'm reading Rav Chaim's words. Lahoros, to teach Yosef, she'ein hu avod v'nishkach, that he's not lost and abandoned. El adrabah, to the contrary, HaKadosh Baruch Hu molicho yad biyad. God is traveling with him, holding his hand. V'hu ya'amodimo yeredimo mitzrayim, and he will go down with him to Mitzrayim. God gave Yosef first-class accommodations so that Yosef should realize that, okay, this is my lot for whatever reason, but I'm not going down to Mitzrayim by myself. It's like the pasuk in Tehillim. Gam ki elech b'geit samabes lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Even when I have to go in the valley of death, I won't be frightened because you are with me. Yosef felt the hand and the closeness of Kadosh Baruch Hu. As the Kadosh Baruch Hu arranged that there should be a beautiful fragrance in the caravan as he went down to Mitzrayim. I am certain that Rav Chaim, this insight that Rav Chaim had was from his own experiences in Shanghai. Rav Chaim was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir. The Mir Yeshiva was originally of course in Mir, and then they traveled to Vilna, and eventually during the war they made their way through the Sagihara, who was one of the Tzadikei Umas Ha'olam. About over 300 members of the Mir Yeshiva made their way to Shanghai, which was in China, but it was under Japanese occupation. And the Mir Yeshiva was there for about 4 years. Those 4 years, Rav Chaim served not only as the Rosh Yeshiva in terms of delivering Torah discourses, but Rav Chaim led the yeshiva. He made all the decisions for the yeshiva, and he was the diplomatic emissary of the yeshiva. Whenever there was interactions with the Japanese officials, and there were many times where Rav Chaim had to meet with the Japanese, and it was such a dangerous and precarious time. The Japanese, after all, were aligned with the Nazis, and they were at war with the Allies. And here to do is these yeshiva guys that belong there like an ice cube at the equator. They were so out of place, and miraculously there was a shul that a wealthy businessman had built, I think 10 years before the Mir came to Shanghai. It was a mystery why built this magnificent, beautiful edifice. There were hardly any Jews in Shanghai, but he built it, and then the Mir came and they used that building. But the whole time that they were there, every single day they were in mortal danger for their lives. The war was raging in Europe and around the world and in the Pacific Ocean, and they were under the control of the Japanese government. So Rav Chaim often had to meet with the Japanese officials. There's a biography about Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, and it described how there were times when he would meet with people, with officials, and he didn't know that he would come out alive. There was one, I recall, there was one particular location where it was well known that when the Japanese called you in that place, it was a one-way trip. Nobody came out alive. And Rav Chaim endured the whole time. Rav Chaim was not prepared to be a diplomat. He didn't have any official training. He was thrust into that position, and it was so remarkable that he managed to carry the weight of the yeshiva on his shoulders, and to be the one that related to the Japanese officials. And Rav Chaim oftentimes speaks about achrayus, about responsibility, and he says that the measure of a greatness of a person is the sense of responsibility, of achrayus. How much achrayus they take, that's the measure of the person. Rav Chaim took tremendous achrayus for the yeshiva. He carried the yeshiva on his shoulders. He rose to the occasion. As a Talmid Chacham, besides being a brilliant Talmid Chacham, but he was the spiritual leader of the yeshiva, and he carried the whole yeshiva. And you understand also the how difficult it was, and these boys that were separated from their families, and they were hearing trickles of what was going on, and the massacres, and they were still in Shanghai when the war ended, and they heard about the annihilation of 6 million Jews. Rav Chaim, he carried the entire burden on his shoulders as a tremendous religious leader, but in particular, how did he survive those meetings with the Japanese officials? Why wasn't he scared to death to the extent that he wouldn't be able to open his mouth? Why why did he walk in shivering and shaking? I'm certain it's because Rav Chaim felt that that God is holding his hand. The fact that the Mir Yeshiva, it was survived the Holocaust and the raging fires that were taking place in Europe, and miraculously the yeshiva was in a shul in Shanghai that seemed to have been built just for them. That was the hand of God. So Rav Chaim felt God is here. Even though it's an enormously difficult time, but God is the one that's holding our hands as we go through this. And when he went into those meetings, he felt that God is holding my hand. And if you're holding on to God's hands, then it's possible to draw enormous strength. Rav Chaim described the same thing about Esther, that when she went to the Achashverosh to plead for the Jewish people, she wasn't a courageous person. She was a young girl, and she was kidnapped. She was forced to be the queen, and here she had to go up against Haman, Harasha. That then the Navi said, "Tilbash Esther Malchus." Before she went to meet with Achashverosh, she put on royalties. So Rav Chaim says, what does it mean, royalty? It means she put on this sense of achrayus. That was Malchus. Malchus means to be responsible. She rose also to the occasion. She wore Malchus when she went into Achashverosh, and that's why she was able to be so forceful. So that insight, I am sure, Rav Chaim had, because that's what he was describing himself. But Tilbash Malchus, Rav Chaim wore the garments of royalty when he went to meet with the Japanese officials, and that's why he wasn't afraid. He wasn't petrified and scared to death. I'm sure there was an overriding sense of trepidation, but he had a tremendous sense of strength, because God was holding his hand, exactly like he says about Yosef, that Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Molicho Yad B'Yad. Yosef, God was leading Yosef hand in hand, because Yosef felt that, look, God gave me these accommodations, the beautiful fragrance. I'm not alone. I'm going into a difficult situation, but I'm going with the Ribbon Shalom. And what's the lesson for us? The lesson is that we all go through difficult experiences in life. Nobody is free. Nobody has a life that's just a bowl of cherries. There's always stuff going on. There's small problems and big problems and challenges, and it's difficult to deal with many of the things that take place. The stresses are very hard. If we do it alone, then it's sometimes just overwhelming. I mean, there's so many people that can't cope with all the things that are going on. But we have to. This message of Rav Chaim should inspire us that we're not in it alone, and we have to look to see the just like Yosef recognized God's presence from the fragrance of the spices, and Rav Chaim recognized God's presence from the fact that miraculously there was a yeshiva available for them in Shanghai that accommodated them. So in every situation, there's always good things going on. I last week, I wasn't in shul because I had a pinched nerve in my arm. I could not function. It was the first time in 40 years that I didn't go to shul for davening on Shabbos. But I was in such enormous pain. But I was thinking, it affected my left hand. Baruch Hashem, I'm a righty. If I had the pinched nerve in my right hand, I wouldn't be able to write. And that, for me, that's so critical to be able to use my right hand. So there's always a silver lining. You always have to feel that you have to recognize the good part that's taking. Baruch Hashem, I'm feeling somewhat better. But you always have to recognize that God as we go through life, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Molicho Yad B'Yad. God is holding our hand. Who Yoredim Mitzrayim. God took Yosef to Mitzrayim, and that will give us the strength to deal with all the challenges that there are in life. I wish everybody a good Shabbos, and thank you very much for listening.